as I keep going further into the future, um, I keep seeing more people on the planet again. Like in China, everybody died of dust storms and abortion and slavery, and now it's all full of people again. In some places, they say that there's a bunch of old people and no young people, but that's due to shifting economic states that make all families leave an area. So, um, I was noticing and thinking about how to solve Greece's financial woes and rebuild their economy for the cheapest possible price, but with the newest possible renovation concepts. And I realized the same thing could be done here in China that I'm going to be talking about. So, I was also going to point out um, Jakarta, the same thing can be done. So, if we go to the wetlands, to the infinite farming, you've got these kind of consolidated farming generational houses with their, regular garden plots and yards and whatever. And then the fields go out on either side and they tend it, in groupings instead of one house for each field like they do in the US, because that's more difficult to unless you have incredibly strong healthy minds and bodies to be real perfectly attuned with growth of your body through nature, and that means not eating all the garbage chemicals of the modern era if you actually want to have your own farm. Um, so this is the way everybody does it for even, historically. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way. What I was going to point out about this is where they've broken down the system over the last 500 years. There's one thing that's made it more difficult instead of getting easier. Back in the day, the blacksmithing and the whatever had to be integrated along in areas so that each thing that needed to be done in the whole system of survival in connection to farming and everything else around that in small hamlets, like they had to have it all in each area and they had to do training with apprentices and all that, right? Well, the point is, we've somehow fallen away from that. And there's a lack of interactability and like connection. Like in my neighborhood, for example, there's been different extremes depending upon who's around. You've got the total cooperation extreme, where everybody's like your family, they're so friendly, and everything, gets cross finished as you have a community purpose that's functional. Because you're all getting along because you have a common interest and you aren't hanging out all the time to not get along. Um, at moments, you know what I mean. Uh, Friendship, courtesy. You don't spaz out. The point is, um, pleasantries of modern society and all of that somehow have vanished as we've gotten more technological and they have to return. So everybody, like in my neighborhood, right, they have shops and tractors and all this stuff. And it's just like they're all loner isolated though and have their small cliques and stuff. And it's like so spoiled. Everybody's so spoiled rotten. It's disgusting. And then you see how little gets done and how much they had to bring in slave minorities to build their properties up so they can sit around and lord it over everyone. So that trades out and you get a more optimistic, militaristic but Christian, not military like phony commando bullshit. Like the organization skill part of it, nothing else that really matters. Like you gotta have manufacturing shops for different stuff for tractors and everything. I mean, there's so many different steps that are missing here. I didn't want to get too much in detail about it because I just need to get that idea out there again. All the different things that need to be available to keep farming running and improving things. And like, there's just way too much grain. People, that doesn't make sense. You've got to eat more bush and tree and ground root and yeah, etc. Come on. So, um, we're gonna come over here. I was reading an article talking about Jakarta and its problems. So I always say, okay, go to the volcanic mountain, come in here and plant 50% diverse food trees and bushes and spices and stuff, everything. So you have a sustainable zone in there. Um, and then you bring in like the animals and insects that take care of the bad animals and insects. And you have your universities do research into that, like has been happening in the US now for a couple decades. And real improvements can be made instantaneously, it feels like. Um, Now, there's this whole issue where people don't want their fishing destroyed out in here. Um, because they've talked about putting in a giant seawall because it's shallow and then it would cause all kinds of problems um, for fishermen and messing up everything. So, just a second here. What I've got written here: fisherman assistive wave breaker pier. Um, the concept here is you have like how this big flange piece is here where you have like miniatures of that every so often that are like then gaps between them so that you don't have big waves roll in, and because that's what wears things out in here, even if they don't seem like that big of waves because you're nestled inside of this zone here. And then you have it set up so that these are actual docks and areas for fishermen commerce for crab catching, whatever the hell they're doing, even though crabs are not ideal to be eaten all the time. Okay, people that eat crabs get crabby, right? um so pier, the concept here is, if I look up, I've seen it, I know they exist. So if I do a search, well, this isn't Google search, but let's see what happens. For largest saltwater trees with long roots. Of course, there's mangroves. Um, yeah, I was actually thinking alternatively last night when I was thinking about it, maybe coastal redwood. as well. Get those started in between the mangroves. So what you have to do, because they're saying their whole economy, their whole system's going to sink. They're using up all their well water on their island area that's coming in, filtering in through the ground from the ocean. So this system I'm going to describe that fixes bulk grain movement and other types of farming, it fixes all of it. Okay. So they're afraid all of this is going to sink. Parts of it already have. They're sucking up all the groundwater because apparently they don't get enough moisture all year round. And then the real problem is they do sort of, but then the city is infinite. I mean, suddenly Jakarta, right? It's outskirts cities. They say it's 10 million and then maybe more, 20 million. And it's just so many people in one area that um you need quite a few acres of farming, even if you're not feeding it to animals, to feed if you have enough people and you have a small area like this in comparison. And that's why not properly managing all of the national parks, mountain areas, and stuff to have edibility and have programs for people to create diverse bio developed landscapes. Like, come on now. Okay, so ultimately, mangroves are the way to do it, and you make the roots grow down a ways. You make them on the support setups with the concrete and whatever. And then, even if the concrete wears out in the water in 20 to 50 years, then you have the mangroves established extra huge. Um, and you need these mangrove systems to run along the lowlands with these canals I'm going to be talking about. In this case, they're saltwater canals, so you can put mangroves along them. Um, and then you can have your populace eating more seafood for cheaper because instead of all this being farmed, it's like developed into more zones where there's farms, of course, but in between is all the canals and stuff for shipping and boating in general for pleasure to different destinations. But um by putting in saltwater canals across the lowlands, which are very extensive in a lot of part of the world, then you have all of that sea life that comes in. If you make it, wide enough and have zones where they like to come in and you have it all set up, and then you can create sustainable water farms that aren't farm raised because they're still connected to the ocean, and you don't use much chemicals or anything because again it's connected to the ocean and it's all bioregulated. Duh. This needs to be done down there in Louisiana. It all needs to be actually thought of as a serious job to, get things improved because you need more resources for all these city slickers, who in turn have to be expected in the coming years and decades to be able to go out and be part of the effort to do certain things out in the forest. Like, I mean, when it comes to basic like forestry, bushes and stuff. I don't mean landscaping. I mean like everybody's going to be picking food for the other people in turn. You don't get to sit around and not understand what the jungle forest is in the city generation after generation. Then you fear it and then you cut it down. You have to like it. You have to be a part of it. You have to be integrated. So these upgrades, and especially this area I'm talking about here, these areas, they all need to be integrated that way so that you have fresh ocean water reaching these seas again, and then you can have that saltwater biomarine life farming sustainably up into your land in between your farms, and then you have all of that um controlled, of course. And but the point is, with the mangroves and everything, that will quickly refill and saturate down into the aquifer and transform that seawater naturally down through the layers of the farming, whatever, down through the crust into the water zones under there, and refill them real quick. Um, there was a question that Spider-Man actors had to answer. Would you have go without bathing, showering anymore, or would you go without brushing your teeth anymore? So they said, oh, Tom Holland said, oh, well, you could get tree bark that cleans your teeth or whatever and not use toothbrush and toothpaste. So I guess you could get around that. But there's a large percentage of the world that for maybe thousands of years only get to bathe like once a year and have to oil scrape with herbal oils and then a small amount of water to slick it all off. You don't get that's such a luxury, People have been living on hell planet while other people are just living it up. It's crazy. Um so having people trained and like developed an understanding themselves, because this is a new concept to mass farm both, coastal and farming up through into areas. This needs to be developed quickly. It's crucial. And there needs to be generalized plans as to avoid chemicals that destroy areas like this. Um Now, the great thing about water canals, I was thinking about it last night as well in connection to this Greece area. Um, I was thinking, right, you get to where these canals at 200 to 300 feet can't really get over this mountain. You'd have to cut a big gap through here around wherever, and it would be a big pain. So I was thinking alternatively, you'd have, rail lines. But instead of making it all complicated with big trains that get in the way, you would have it be like the shipping depot down to the ocean, and the storage area by the ocean would happen wherever, up in here, over here, wherever, before it gets up too high. And then you'd have these tracks that come right off of the barges or whatnot, off the boats. And then your shipping containers of different sizes would have simple latch on points that already exist on the outside of them. Simple latched on, like big mousetrap, like uh magnetic, like float plates, and then it would be on a float magnetic rail that, repels, I guess electrically, but I mean you could actually make it stably. Hell, you could do it with nitrogen and super freeze beneath the train as you go along and have that coast effect from the super magnets of cold, but that's unrealistic except in the winter. But I mean you could do it in the summer anyways and have it all. I'm just thinking that's hilarious, but ultimately, the big rail systems they have in the rail yards, you have like a toned down version of that. So it'd be like, power lines, but it would be to move shipping containers, maybe stacked two or three high or more. Not too high. That's spooky. But you could get away with two or three maybe. And you have them moving along down, up a little ways and down, stabilized, all stacked and um, locked together with a simple system. And then the overhead guiding rails that are sliding along, because it's not too many miles. And that seems more practical than trying to dig through people's hills and farms up through, past all of that. So in that way, you could have the barges show up and they could slide their um, containers right off with whatever's in there, grain or whatever, right onto um right onto these tracks, right off of, and then it would get on its way, and they'd be marked, and then when they arrive, they'd either be stacked in a storage cargo yard or go straight onto ships, ideally to go off to deliver stuff, or things would come in the other way and be delivered into Greece and come up over and then go onto barges. But here's the best part: this canal system would also, right, have a train system next to it. So if you'll see trains where they'll cut along rivers or over lakes where they're somewhat shallow, and they'll have built up rock line island across a lake or whatever. Um, and that'll only be, the high point of the lake. They'll only make it 5 or 10 feet above that. Um, so this is very practical what I'm describing here. You would have the canal such that there would be, um, depending upon the size you want to work with, you'd have, say, if it's one rail track, then you would have it down the center of the canal. And then your barge would be like saddled over that rail track. And then it would be floating on the water, um, on the canals on either side. And then the weight of shipping on the tracks goes way down. Like you can balance it out so that with simple adjustments, so that you basically, with the floating system of the hulls of the boats on either side, horseshoeing along, it is floating freely. Like you can equalize out the pressure on the tracks so that you decrease or increase it dynamically with ballast and air you can intake and dump, and uses acceleration and deceleration or whatever. But I can't really see any flaw in this system in the modern era where it's actually doable and quick to build and pour out the concrete and everything, get it done. This can be utilized all over the world, including in North America, of course. It can be utilized on a local level, like in the Treasure Valley, somewhat. Now, if you wanted to go grandiose, you could have two tracks and then a giant barge that would be straddling both of them with like the whole canal, one giant barge moving with, tracks on either side. So you do massive movements of stuff, like for NASA, giant rocket pieces and stuff. I don't know why they aren't using ice in the north or water when it's, summer to float their rocket pieces. They have these enormous high end train tracks, but they're always having to upkeep those because of the weight of it all smushing the tracks around against the ground, moving those pieces. So, wouldn't it be great if you had a canal that, went straight enough that you could say you're trying to ship out a bunch of my windmill lengths for lightning, solar windmills that I designed with other kids in Elko. That's finally going to happen. And so if you have an infrastructure set up where you have these canals that are trains as well, then no matter how heavy something is or cumbersomely large, you can zoom it right along at a steady speed. Um, it's just so much safer, absolutely safe. You have no more accidents. It can all be managed like automated, basically, so that a farmer in the future somewhere could say, okay, my grain shipment that's going somewhere else in the world, um, there's space along the canal to the coast, and his boat's there at a certain point in the day at 2:15 in the afternoon is his slot. So then his automated tractor and stuff gets it all done. It's loaded up, put onto a smaller um skiff barge along a smaller side canal that's within, a mile or five of him, whatever, or right beside his farm ideally, like some parts of China. And then you're whisking your goods straight to the main train line that is the canal line. Um, let's see here. I think that pretty much covers the idea. I'm not gonna, like I never do. I never get into when I'm laying out the initial designs. It's just a concept, and then I wait and see how society receives it in this era currently. And then all the positive stuff that starts coming out of it, developments, then I can come in and say, okay, I didn't have to think of all of this myself. Here's what's going on. Here's what looks good. Let's develop this further. Here's how. Okay, so I guess thanks for watching this one episode of Fixing the Planet with Ammon-Ra.